things like Confucius and some of those Eastern philosophers and stuff like that. There's just so much that has been passed down into their world. And then so much of the history we have is because people did something fantastic enough that the
Greetings.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Joe and Doug Show. This is the spot where we do our best to help you become the best version of yourself, talking all things life, leadership, helping people make the right decisions and take the next step for them. How are you?
I'm doing great.
I had a great
How about
day
you?
today. I had a very good day. I've had a good week. Kids are good. My mother-in-law's in town, so stuff in my house is like cleaner, and she's taking care of the kids. It's been a breath of fresh air for she's gonna be a whole month with us. Like my wife got to go grocery shopping by herself. We have 4 kids. That never happens.
It's like Disneyland for her, right?
Yeah.
Just going by yourself to do anything.
And I don't have to juggle, like a lot of times I have to juggle my schedule to come home because she has a chiropractor appointment or she's got to run over here and she needs to go somewhere by herself. And then I have to come home, watch the kids. So I have to, all right, I got 2 hours in my day that I have to block off to come home so that, but having mom here has been great. We haven't had to do that. So I've been extra productive. I got some extra reading done. It's been good. Good stuff.
Good. That's awesome.
So
bring us up to speed.
Yeah, this is what I want to talk about.
Okay.
So I'm going to intro it this way, and I don't necessarily want to get into the politics of it all. That's not what this show's designed to do. But everything that took place yesterday with the Capitol and the riot, etc. I feel like people are putting their trust in things that aren't trustworthy. Whether that's a person, whether that's a political movement, whether that's finances, whatever that is.
Yep. And
they stake their life on it, and then when that house of cards crumbles, they don't know what to do. And then it comes out in violence, confusion, apathy. It can express itself in a number of different ways. And I think a little bit of what we saw yesterday, not all of it, but a little bit of it, had to do with this house of cards that they had kind of staked their space on, and we all have our political opinions. We all should vote, and most of us did vote, and have our feelings one way or the other on policy and so on. But when that is your hope, when the right person being elected, when the right scenario getting in there, and then that doesn't happen for you, when people are hopeless, they do reckless things. And so I want to take maybe a little more introspective, spiritual kind of look at, where we stake our hope, when we don't have a solid foundation for anything, when stuff comes in or stuff doesn't go the way we planned, or we positioned our lives, finances, whatever in such a way, and then that house of cards comes crumbling down, it's easy to be disappointed, and that can lead into all kinds of horrible things. So to step off into that, does that picture kind of surmise it? Yeah. Because people with politics, particularly right now, we have 2 camps, and they hate each other, and the media plays up the downsides and plays down the good sides, and just continues to create this vacuum in between. But everybody puts their hope, and I say this from the platform all the time: the hope of the world does not live at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue. Yes, is it important that we are engaged civically? Is it important the laws that govern us? Absolutely. But at the end of the day, my life is built on something different. And I don't want to get preachy, and I don't want to get too into that, but we have to have more to us than who we vote for, what we do for a living, how much money we have. Like all of that stuff at some point, the factory closes. Like at some point, you end up seeing zero in there. You might be bankrupt. You might take a big risk and lose. Like at some point, if your hope is in these things, they will be shaken from your life. So I'm going to ask a series of questions to kind of steer us into that conversation.
And I'm going to try to derail you.
Okay, good.
Yes.
Good, because it's a little heavy. And but for you, what are the constants? What are the pillars that hold up Joe's life? That, whether the president you voted for or not gets into office, whether your company goes bankrupt, what are the things that help you stay sturdy even when stuff doesn't go quite the way that you anticipated.
It's the P word, man. And so let me kind of give you that. We can microcosm this so that if it's a little too radioactive to talk about politics, like we're human beings and we do the same stuff at our house and in our own communities and with our our relatives and whatever. We basically build faith in things that were unsturdy when they were injected, that we have no control over, that we're on it for the ride. And then there's a scenario where we could see it go bust. And if you don't already warm up to that before you get started, then you know what's going to happen. Just time, right? Time's going to be there. So the P word's the principles. It's what you buy into, what you believe in, and what you'll fight for. And when you outsource all of this hope on things that you don't control, you're hoping that they're carrying some principles that you are. And most of the time, they aren't, right? They're not even in your corner. Like, you reverse it, right? You're in trouble. Come rescue me, oh big whatever it is. And they're not going to be there. So, but we treat it like that team sport where we're loyal to the death on something that if it reversed, they wouldn't be there for you. But principle is my short answer. Okay.
Yeah, I definitely would agree with that. There are certain principles and pillars that uphold our lives. Has there been a moment in your life where something didn't go as planned and you had maybe staked some hope in it and had to lean back on some principles to pick yourself back up?
No, I mean, I told you that when Deb was sitting here next to me, we decided what our principles were. No matter what, here's the important things: where each other, trust, being able to, even difficult things, be able to tell one another. And that's all we need. Money, it'd be nice. A nice house, it would be nice. And all these other things that can go away tomorrow. And it would just boil down to the original principles. And we just find that version of ourselves that we started with, right? That can't go bust. And that's what I should to protect. So burn my car. Go ahead. See what happens. Guess where? I'm right back into my original principles, and I'll build it back because the car came from the principles.
Yep. No, 100%. And I do think because we live in a lottery culture, a luck culture, a microwave culture where, people think that, well, I got lucky to get that, or they look at other people that have stuff and they go, oh, that's just lucky. And it's like, no, I built my life on a certain set of standards. I think a certain way, I act a certain way, and those thoughts and actions produce a certain type of life. And when you start staking your hope in the Hail Mary, as we've talked about so many times on the show, not on the 1 yard run that you can control, but on the toss up that, well, maybe it'll get there. And just because you get it one time doesn't mean you can repeat it, is the other side of it. So what are some of those principles that you and Deb have agreed are, hey, these are pillars that no matter what comes our way, we're not going to be shifted, these things?
All right. So it's the stuff that you would be willing to fight for and put opposition against it, that you're going to, sacrifice lots of important things in order to get. So the sanctity of your marriage. I mean, that there's, if you have someone you can go back on that you trust and you can say anything to, then the rest of the world doesn't really matter all that much. And their complicity to anything that you do, you have that. Right. Family, super important to me. And I would say that, I've pretty much built all of my superpowers on my ability to go back to my family.
So that's your safe space.
That's my
safe
spot. Yep.
And how do you navigate? So I want to push a little bit here. So how do you navigate? So like, obviously, pillars are important pieces. They're not necessarily the bedrock, but sometimes our pillars get pushed. You have a death in the family that you didn't expect. Like that can push certain things. Sometimes you have pillars and the marriage gets tested. What do you do if you have a crack in a pillar?
I mean, what's trying to be spoken to you through that crack? I mean, it could be like a warning that something that is whole needs some attention and that you weren't realizing it. So I find out where the voice is coming from and what it's trying to say.
Yeah. So broadly speaking, I think a lot of people in our culture right now either have different pillars or they don't have any pillars and they just keep positioning their life on sand and it keeps moving from them. Whether it's somebody getting elected every 4 years, whether it's if I just get that job, if I just whatever, and they live in a constant state of disappointment. For somebody that maybe doesn't feel like they have any principles, or maybe they're unaware that the principles are there and they've built some principles that just are crappy, how do you start finding those principles? Because like you said, family is important to you, but somebody else, they might be single, that not, that's just not important to them. I'll call my mom every once in a while, but it's not a pillar for me. I don't have to run back to that. So everybody's going to have a couple of different ones. And so how do you choose yours, and how do you decide? I know you mentioned the fight, but how do you decide what's worth fighting for?
And you can discover that what it is to you. And if it's not family, if it is finances, if it's spirituality, if it's your job or whatever, something that you're like, this is who I am, this encapsulates who I am. And I don't think necessarily that people that don't have principles don't have principles. They just have principles that have asterisks next to them. It allows them to escape because I'm telling you, principles are a bitch sometimes. Like, they don't make things easy. When you say, I think lying is wrong, right? It's not just lying, or it's not just wrong when it's easy. It is wrong when it's really super hard and you have some loss on the other side of telling the truth. And when they're a principle, you remove that little asterisk next to it and you say, that thing I'm willing to fight for when it's easy and when it's hard.
Yeah, when you said about lying, it reminded me of the movie. I don't know if you've ever seen Kingdom of Heaven with Liam Neeson, and it's a Crusader movie based on the Crusaders, and the one guy finds out he has a dad who's a Crusader knight or whatever, and anyway, they have this exchange, and when he becomes a knight, they have this little thing that they recite, and one of the things one of the last things that he tells him is, you need to speak the truth even if it leads to your death. And it was like one of those principles. And we have those mantras in life. Companies have axioms they live by or things on the wall, but we have those mantras that we've been raised with. My dad would say all the time, can't means won't. It's something I say to my kids all the time.
Right.
It's not that you don't have the ability, but you're lacking the fortitude or the will to see it through. So for you, you're saying you have resolved around a couple of core principles, and those things tend to be the strongest points in your life. Even if they get cracks in them, you're able usually to repair those and continue to move forward so that the rest of your life can be built on top of that.
Yeah, because when those principles are challenged, if you aren't able to fight back, then you just create another asterisk that allows it to be a non-principle. But you treat it like it's a principle, but if you ever need it, you're going to pull it out and it's going to be rusty and it's not going to do what it needs for you.
Yeah. Well, but I think most people look at the stuff on top and don't look at the stuff underneath. They see he's got companies, he's done this, he's done that. They see money, they see whatever's going on the exterior. Oh, they bought a new house. You know what I mean? And they look at that stuff and go, oh, it must be nice, and not realize, I spent the last 2 decades digging this pillar down so that I could have that house, so that I could run this company, so that I could do some of these things. And everybody wants the top layer, but without the foundation, that stuff is just an illusion. That's why so many lottery winners end up bankrupt, because they didn't take the time to build the pillars to actually be able to possess the money that they won.
Right.
So for somebody who's sitting there and starting out into business, and they're just passionate, excited, maybe just graduated college, whatever, and they're trying to figure out what they can do to build some pillars that's going to uphold them for the future, where should they start?
So when I got into business, I was told that the small businesses basically last about 2 years, right? They go out of business within the first 2 years of existing.
Is that still true?
Yeah. I was wondering, what was the mechanics behind it failing within every 2 years? And what I found just through the exploration of businesses is that that's how often your business gets challenged to see if it's weak or strong. So if you have a business that lasted 20 years, it's been tested 10 solid times and different, and it survived those tests. So if you want to be in it in a long game, you got to know what fails businesses and build your pillars around what happens to other people. Go out in the marketplace and find out, well, this one failed because of this and this. Build those pillars up, and then when you get tested in that area, you know exactly. I got super hopeful that sort of like my technical ability was one of the first things that got tested. Right? I got challenged in a way that said, you're dumb, Joe. You're not up to where your peers are. And then I could have buckled and said, yeah, you're right. I don't know everything that there needs to be, but I knew that one was coming because I was serious that I knew there was people way ahead of me. So, but my challenge was, I know that I'm not going to be the smartest out there, but I can damn well be the most honest. So if you ask me if I know it, all I'm going to do is tell you yes or no. I'm not going to pull a veil over you and get the job not knowing it is. I'm going to say, hey, you know what? I don't know much about this. If you trust me enough to be able to, be straight with you, then I'm the guy for your job.
Yeah,
some people said no, and I had to be cool with people saying no, you're not smart enough. But I was, before it was a problem, I had to dance with that one, and that's trouble when you got ego involved.
Yeah. Well, and you got employees to pay, and it's like, I'm going to give this job up because
Right.
You know, if I just said it this way, they'd hire me. But if I'm straight with them, they probably aren't going to hire me, and I'm still going to shoot straight with them. That's,
So, but in 20 years down the road, you've been tested 10 times. The ones are different in 20 years. Like, it's not structural. Like the structural, and I got to be just as honest on day one, because that pillar still needs to be solid. Even though I'm not being tested in the honesty thing anymore, it's part of my identity at this point. It's built into the fabric.
So that's see, now we're jumping places.
Sorry.
But that's honestly the truth. Is if you build something consistent over time, your pillars really become your reputation in business, become your character.
Yeah, for sure.
You know, in person. So let's play a little game then.
Sure.
You know, we've been friends now for a little over 2 years. Just kind of crazy. I can't believe
I feel like I've known you forever.
I know, but I still can't believe that it's been 2 years.
Yeah.
But, it feels like we've grown up together.
Right.
So when you look at me, what sort of pillars do you see in my life? The things that, you know, you've watched me, you've heard me preach enough, and that sort of stuff. What would be some of those things that you say, these are built into his reputation? He's dug down deep for some of these.
Now, I see you as like a blob of glue. Like you draw people of all different stripes, and you find a way to connect people who would not normally connect with sciences, right?
Yeah.
And you're an attractant to the best of people. I mean, you draw better stuff out of me. I didn't even know the stuff I had in me, but your questioning and you know, how you warm up to people. I think that's probably your best principle, is that you can be draw people in and keep them. I mean, I know you tolerate a lot of stuff. And you probably meet all kinds of different people, but you don't judge anything that you draw in. You drew it to you, and you keep it around no matter what it smells like.
Yeah. It's interesting. I picked up a principle probably 15 years ago. And I tell people that relationships are spatial, not special, spatial. And there is a space for everyone in your life. And I've taught this to my leaders and team, and, you know, everybody, and I use this house analogy, everybody has the ability to come up and knock on my door. Now I have a choice whether or not they get to come into my home. And maybe the space they occupy is they just get to come up and knock on my door and say hello. And that's fine. Some people are just going to drive by and wave. But then I walk them through, and I'm not going to do this now, but I walk them through each room. Like, some people get to come into my living room and they see some pictures. They know some things about me. We're acquaintances. We hang out every once in a while. They may see me in public or wherever. Other people get to sit at my table. They get to have food with me. And that's a little different relationship, and we're sharing heart and we're sharing food. And you get the wrong person in the wrong place. There's only one person that goes in my bedroom, but you put the wrong person in the wrong place and you end up with a lot of problems. And so I teach through that in that sense. But that for me has been my whole life. Like, even in school, it's funny that you say that now, it's bringing me back here. So even when I was in middle school or high school, you know, people would ask me, like, were you a jock? Were you, you know, you had like the cluster of friends. I'm like, I was kind of friends with everybody. Like, I played sports with guys, and I could have sat at that lunch table, and I sat at this lunch table, and I I had friends that were in band, and I had friends that liked to do art, and I had friends that were really smart, and I felt like I was pretty friendly with everybody. And hindsight, now that you say that, I'm like, well, that's probably been true most of my life. It's probably in my hard wiring to some extent. And I love to do that. It's one of the things that, for me, I'm like, when I meet somebody, it's like everything about them that's the best, and I always believe the best. And my wife gives me a hard time sometimes because you get taken advantage of that way.
Yeah, for sure.
But I want, like, when I see them, I'm like, oh my gosh, they're so good at this and they don't even realize it. And I'm like, how do I mine that gold out of them? What do I need to do? Who do I need to connect them to? Or somebody will say, oh, I like to do da-da-da. I'm like, well, great, come over here. They like to do da-da-da-da, and you're going to get together and you guys are going to do amazing things. And they'll be like, yeah, I don't know. It's just my natural proclivity.
From a theoretical level, we always hope that the hammer and nail find one another. Yeah. You're like the guy that like makes sure that they do, in spite of all of the reasons they shouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a good one, man. Yeah, that was a good answer. I didn't know if I was going to stump you with that one. I was like, do I ask that question? It may throw them off a little bit, and it's a little personal. So I was like, no, you know, you don't. It's like being in Sunday school, and they're like, what's the answer to that? And the kid's like, Jesus, and you're like, shut up, dude. That's not the answer. Like, you didn't read what you're supposed to read, and so I didn't know if I was going to get one of those answers that you're gonna like box up and be like, but that was a good answer.
Thank you.
So for people that are trying to discover those, because some people I think are not not good evaluators of themselves. So they don't necessarily see what you just saw in me. They don't necessarily see that in themselves. A lot of people downplay their best attributes. Drives me bananas, because I'm like, that's the thing you're best at. They're like, oh, I'm not really good at that. And I'm like, I'm going to throat punch you. You're actually amazing at that. And they downplay that, sometimes out of insecurity, sometimes because they've never had anybody believe in them, and they've tried to do stuff before and it hasn't panned out. And so it's taught them to be afraid of it. How do you self-discover when you may not be a good evaluator of yourself?
Even when we're talking like diet and finances, a lot of the reasons you don't see anything is because you have so much noise blocking it. And it's, a lot of those things are nice and quiet and your life is super loud. And, you have to create some sensitivities so you can quiet down the things that are calling to your attention that aren't even important. I mean, a lot of this stuff we see on TV, we're watching it every second of it. You know what I'm doing? I'm like going into another room where it's quiet, where I can really discover things that are important. Yeah. And that's not like a cheesy cliche thing. If I watched it just like you, I'd forget that I have a family that needs my attention way more than that TV needs my attention.
No, that's good. Yeah, I think for a lot of folks, it's helpful to have somebody that you are with and that knows you and is able to see things that you don't. It's one of the things that, what being married, Sam sees stuff in me that I'm like, wow, really? You think I'm good at that? Like, or vice versa. I'll say, hey, you're amazing at that. And she's like, I don't think I'm good at that. And then encouraging and positioning and helping. So having somebody else sometimes point in can help you see your blind spots too. That's the other thing, is like when you drive a car, there are certain blind spots, not in your car, but in other people's cars. Okay.
I have 8 cameras that are spinning in circles, beaming things down from the space station. So we're good.
Yeah. But typically and previously, people always had blind spots. You had to check over your shoulder and make sure you didn't hit somebody else. And you had rearview mirrors to do that. But in life, you have blind spots. They're just things that you didn't see before, didn't know you were good at. And to have somebody come alongside and go, you know what, you're not seeing this right now because you're too close to the situation. Or you're not seeing this right now because you don't give yourself enough credit. Let me just help you a little bit. And that's why mentors, friends, all of that stuff is so important. But when you're self-evaluating those things, some people don't self-evaluate well because they're scared at what they're going to find.
Yeah, you might not be a great person. And it's probably the case. If you haven't done this before, you're going to uncover stuff that you'd probably be a little afraid of.
Yeah. But anything that's brought into the light, when you expose anything to light, it gets healed, it gets better. And so I often tell people, when we bring stuff in the light, even the really ugly stuff, it lets us clean it, it lets us disinfect it, it lets us do the things that are necessary to make it healthy and whole. When it stays in the dark, that's where it gets infected, that's where it ruins things, lives, relationships, and so on. So if you do some self-discovery and you find some of these pillars in your life that you're like, man, I'm hardwired for this, and I don't like that I'm hardwired for this. I want to change this pillar. Now, pillar change is tough.
Massive.
It's not like up here, like I can buy a new house, I can change jobs, like the stuff that people see, but getting underneath that and doing some serious surgery to pull out a pillar that I don't like, I'll be honest, so one pillar that drives me nuts that's in a lot of people's lives, they build their life on keeping people out of the deep stuff, and they use sarcasm and humor to deflect and keep people away. It's almost like an armor to keep people actually from going into their pillars. I always want to destroy that in the worst way, because I'm like, you are just hurting everybody around you, or you're keeping everybody out, and you're never going to have any depth. But to go in there and to get past some of our armor and then pull a pillar out, what does that take? And have you ever done it before?
I've done that for a lot of people, and it, it's one of those things where you see Indiana Jones, and if you take the idol off, you got to put a bag of sand there to replace it, because that's part of your identity that you just ripped out of your soul, right? Yeah. And so like a lot of people, especially like when they believe in things that don't have that measurable value, they're a lot empty inside, but they feel like it's not, because they have that belief that it's going to, even though it crumbles every 2 years in their brain, right? Yeah. They know that somehow they're going to put together some new artificial stuff and create an identity. And I just don't think that there's a lot of future in having something that's so easily destroyed. I mean, think about it. If every 2 years you had to rebuild your house, think about how cumbersome. You spend all of your time rebuilding something instead of having something that's just true and doesn't, get destroyed so easily.
Yeah. There's story in scripture that Jesus tells that, and it's a very simple passage, but basically the wise person builds their house on the rock and the foolish person builds their house in the sand. And when the rains come and the winds come, the house that's built on the sand gets knocked over and the house that's built on the rock stands. And I think for most people in their life, regardless of whether you're, a God-loving, church-going person or you're, just trying to figure this thing out, wherever you're at in this, atheist or not, you have to build on a firm foundation. It's the only way to do it. And if you're building on a foundation you don't like or a foundation that is shaky, you need to change that foundation. And so what are some of the principles that people can use to shift their foundation? Do they have to clear everything off the top? Like
sometimes there's some people that have predicated the other things on other things. So when you take one away, they all crumble at the same time. And I don't want to see anybody while they're trying to develop themselves have their life fall apart on them. But if you're going to do it and you're going to do it on purpose, you know that they all suck and they were all based on lies and they were all based on a person that used to exist and you want to reinvent them. Then the principle is that you are a valuable person deep down inside who can build valuable things when you do it under the proper way. But today you can start building proper stuff, right? So if you don't want to rip everything down, then you can use, the days that go by to have 1% something built. Like going back to our football analogy, you can go out there and do a little bit towards building something authentically. And once that authentic thing happens, it can weather storms when it's real. And then once you get enough authentic things built, then that becomes the pillar that then you can destroy another one, but you still have that refuge.
Yeah, no, and I think sometimes when we're in that, we want to do it immediately. We want to do the Indiana Jones switch.
Yes.
And it takes a lot more time because people undervalue how long it took them to build a certain pillar. Because especially when you're in your 20s and 30s, you've built your pillars sometimes unknowingly, sometimes unintentionally.
Oh yeah, they'll build eventually.
And they've built themselves, so to speak, and you haven't put any intentionality into it. And then you look at the pillars and you go, I don't like that. And you're like, well, I'm just going to knock it out. No. That's been built over the last 30 years of your life. Rome wasn't built in a day, so you're going to have to take the time, sometimes brick by brick, to take that pillar down. And some people are like, well, forget it, and it's too much work, it's too hard, and I hate the statement, but people make it all the time. They're like, well, the same pastor, that's just the way I am. Hold on a second. Yeah, that may be the way you are, but it doesn't have to be the way that you stay.
Yeah.
And I hate when people make that excuse. Well, it's just how I'm wired. No, that's the way you've built your life. That's the choices you've made, and it's culminated in the person you are. Now you can continue down that path, and you can continue to have those pillars, or we can make a change, or we can find the right way to connect you in. But you built that up over the last decade. It's going to take you some time to take this down and build a different pillar.
And I hate the word attrition, but that's exactly what we're talking about. You take a brick down that's fake and you put a new brick up that's real. And then over time, 100 days later, you get 100 authentic bricks and you got 100 less inauthentic bricks.
I feel like with what I'm doing on this health journey right now, I met a guy at the gym this morning that has lost over 200 pounds. He has a lifetime membership to Planet Fitness. I actually think Jed's going to have him on the show coming up to talk about food addiction in a couple weeks. Sweet. Or something. But we were chatting a minute and Jed introduced me to him, and just wild, to hear his encouragement and his story. And I didn't ask this question, but it's basically what he said. And he's like, the secret is just keep showing up. Because if you do it every day and you just show up in this space, even if you have a bad day and you show up, he's like, it works. And I feel like in times past where I've tried to deal with this pillar in my life, this side of self-control and some of these things that I'm not too proud of, not too happy about, but I want to navigate and I really want to be healthy physically. I think for me, arriving at a spot where right now I just feel good, just like I did 45 minutes of cardio today. I didn't beat myself up for not doing an hour. I didn't, but I showed up. I got on the elliptical and whatever little death trap leg swingy thing that Jed makes me do. And we did those for 45 minutes or whatever. And we didn't go lift anything. We didn't do anything, but I got a good sweat. I burned a bunch of calories and then came home, and then I got my app and I'm doing my best to stay within my calories. And for right now, that's what's working. But the consistency of it, and I'm not, in previous ones, I'd be like, oh, I got to get on the scale and, I better have lost 10 pounds this week, or like you had these, I wanted the Hail Mary. I didn't want, what, if I lose 2 pounds this week, it's a good week. It's two less pounds than I had last week. And I feel like I'm in this zone, in this groove with it, where I just feel good about showing up, realizing, hey, I'm going to be 36 next month. It's been 36 years of eating habits. It's been 36 years of health habits. It's been all this stuff. I'm not going to fix it in the month of January.
Yeah. And I'll tell you,
to have that recognition and really consistently show up for a year or 2 years to shift that is going to be crucial.
So, and the way you wrap your mind around these deals, where health before meant something different than it's going to mean in the future. Health is really supposed to feel good, and it's really supposed to be something to be joyous about. Like, you could be your same weight, and you could wake up one day and say, holy shit, I feel healthy. Because it's not the magnified or the reflected version of what you think healthy is. Yeah. It's the state that you're currently in. And I've been financially healthy with $0 in the bank, right?
That's good. That'll preach, bro. That'll preach right there. So for those folks that need help being consistent, what are some of the things they can do to consistently show up and do the hard things to take down a brick at a time?
And those principles that have asterisks don't allow the consistency, because if you're constantly using your imaginative brain to think of excuses about how you're not going to follow it this time, best way to be consistent at this point, pick one of those principles and say, across the board applied, right? If you can start practicing doing small things that should be principles, like I'm going to wake up at 8 o'clock every day. That is one you could do every stinking day and not say, but I'm tired, or I got to do this. Do that. Make some agreements with yourself and come through on them. Your confidence goes up because now you can listen to you. Now other people might listen to you if you can listen to you.
There's a... I don't know if he was a general, but a high up in the military, and he gives this commencement speech, and he talks about the greatest thing you can do for yourself is to make your bed every day, because it starts with one successful act, and then you string together a second one and a third one. And his zinger speech, it went viral. It was on the internet a bit, but it reminds me a bit of that. Because if you can start stringing together the small things, because everybody wants to pick the big things. Like, I'm not going to lose 100 pounds in January, but I can lose 10. And so let's chip away at some of these things, and let's be consistent so that I can show up and lose 10 in February, and then 10 in March. And then all of a sudden by September, it's a different story. I'm a different person. I've built habits. I've done things. I've persevered through certain things. I've showed up to the gym already when I didn't want to, you know, and the more times you string that together, and the more times, everybody else is eating, I came into the office today and they were all eating, that chicken place on 224.
I know you're talking about,
Cane's.
Yeah.
And, it smelled wonderful.
Did it?
And, but I had just eaten lunch, and I had Brussels sprouts and a bison burger and everything else. So I was satisfied physically, but I will tell you right now, I smelled that and I was like,
factory was playing against you.
Oh yeah. It was, I stood there and talked though, and I was okay. And another thing that I've done for myself that, you'll appreciate in this. So when you're rebuilding pillars, sometimes it's good to challenge yourself
on your terms.
On your terms.
Heck yes.
And I know you've said this when we've talked about addiction in general. It's not just about avoiding, but it's about being able to face it and say no, and handle it on your own terms. So New Year's Eve, we had friends over, and their kids drink plenty of regular soda and all that sort of stuff. And so ginger ale is my favorite soda. Like, if I was going to drink any type of soda with sugar in it, whatever, I was going to drink a ginger ale. They asked for ginger ale and Pepsi were the two things they asked for. I'm like, okay. Now, New Year's Eve, I had no ginger ale. I was pretty proud of myself. And, but I was the only one that, I think avoided that arena. I had I had a diet soda that night, but, that ginger ale has been in my garage and it's sitting on the shelf next to my bottled water, next to my Pellegrino and everything else. And I was going to just throw it out. And that's my wife's natural response. Like, let's get this crap out of here. Because in times past, I would have crushed that ginger ale probably in an evening of, hey, we're watching TV. The kids went to bed early, and I would have 2 liter, no problem. And, I left it there, and I was going to throw it out. And then I was like, you know what? I'm going to leave it there, and I'm going to talk to it every day.
Bingo.
And
it's playing a role now.
I walked out the door, and it's right there whenever I go to my car. So I see it every time I'm in, every time I'm out. And there's been a few moments where I'm like, oh, it'd be so good to drink that right now. But going in and going out, it's like, it shouldn't own me like that. And if I want to change this pillar, because that's what I feel like I'm doing. I feel like I'm doing some real deep stuff. I'm not just, everyone's going to see the weight on the outside, but I feel like the things I'm doing, I feel like I've chipped at this pillar before. I've tried and I was like, oh, that's hard, forget it, but I feel like we're digging, and I feel like I'm just around the bottom of this thing, and like, oh, if I can figure this out and I can figure that out, then we'll be okay. But I think that soda for me was one of the things that I'm kind of like, you know what, I'm going to use this to my advantage.
Yeah, I had a run-in with the IRS like decades ago, and they were tracking me down trying to extract $20,000 from a guy that couldn't buy a pizza on a credit card, Yeah. And what I found is if they called me, they made me feel terrible, right? It was a different guy that calls you. Good. But I found out that if I hadn't remembered the last time I talked to the IRS, that I was going to call them, and it ends up at a desk for a guy that's way different than that guy. Because here's what happens. Like, they might not be even two different departments, but they're catching me when I'm in a different moment, not prepared for it, don't have my notes, and now I'm scared because chaos hits you like that. Mm-hmm. But if I call them, I get my notes out, I get my tools out, I'm prepared for it, I got swigging something that's making me feel better, and now I can make the call on my terms. And I follow the IRS me call first theme for everything now. So
I learned that with my student loans. So when I first got out of college, I thought, I'm not making any money right now. And when I started as a youth pastor, I wasn't really making a whole lot of money. And I could remember thinking to myself, well, like, I mean, they can call me, but like at the end of the day, I don't have any money to give them. I didn't come buy pizza. And they would call, and I just ignore the call. And then I would get letters and stuff. And I'm like, oh, what's, $100 of zero, like zero, like you can have whatever. And, but after avoiding it for a little bit, one of the things I learned was, my parents were on some of those and had, so then they started getting calls, and my mom was like, you need to fix this. And so that became the catalyst of calling. But I discovered the exact same thing, that when I started taking their calls, I was like, and they'd be like, how much can you pay right now? I'm like, $27. And they were like, well, you owe us $27,000. What are you going to do?
Take your children when they come out.
and you'd sweat and all that.
Yeah, right.
And then I found, like, if I took a moment and got my stuff together, had my bank, all right, this is how much I have, I could pay this if I need to, had a conversation with Sam once we got married and stuff, and then call them. Sometimes they were like, I can remember I called one, and they were like, well, you only owe like $1,200. Do you have $1,200? I was like, no. And they were like, well, what could you afford to pay? I'm like, I got like $400. They're like, we'll call it settled if you pay us $400. I was like, done.
Yeah.
And I learned that during that time that if I can do some stuff on my terms, that it'll let me not be on my heels but on my toes, and I'm able to engage it a little bit different.
Yeah. And so if you find yourself like it, because you don't have principles, things are chasing you around and they're doing things on their terms and are always springing something on you, you're just behaving terribly because you're not, it's none of your control. It's always on other people's court.
I had the same thing. I racked up a bunch of credit card debt when I was in college, because that's, I guess, what you do. I decided it was really cool to get points and free stuff, and but then
most expensive free stuff ever.
yes, it was. But I finally, I was, you're getting called, and then you got the compound interest and like all that stuff, and I'm like, and it was only $10,000, but at the time, $10,000 seemed like $1 million. Like
right, never be able to pay that.
Right, ever. I'm like, how would I ever be able to pay that? And I can remember I called a debt consolidation company because somebody had said, hey, I was in that same spot. It really helped me out. Stop the calls. And I'm like, I just want the calls to stop. It was like 7 different cards. And it was like, I couldn't keep track of who was on first or who was on second. And it was great. I called, I gave them my information. We did this. And then I was able to pay it off early. And we did some stuff to really do that. But I think those lessons early on for me really taught me, like, hey, if I tackle stuff on my terms, it's different. And that's what I've kind of enjoyed, I think, this go around, this next step, let's call it, in my health journey. Is other times it was like, all right, doc says I need to lose some weight, so I guess I'll go lose some weight, or I'm feeling kind of old and sore, and I shouldn't feel old and sore. Yeah, certain things became the catalyst to have those conversations. But this time, I just feel like I'm in this for me, and it's a different, like I'm doing on my terms. Like before, they called me, I'm on my heels. Like, all right, yeah, I probably should lose some weight, or I don't want to buy a whole new wardrobe, but I'm gonna have to buy a whole new wardrobe if I don't, do this. So, but taking the step to do it on your terms is important, and I think that's key with anything you do, but especially with principles. Like principles will build on their own out of inertia if you don't do it intentionally. But to tackle them on your terms, I think is really key.
All right, let me bring something into your wheelhouse.
Yeah.
Because part of this problem is you start digging through your trash and you start digging through your pillars. There's going to be some stuff that's, you're going to find that's unacceptable. And the goal of this is to take the trash out and throw it in the incinerator and be done with it. Yeah. But when you're playing the single player game, you're holding this bag of thing you're not proud of, and there's really no place to put it. And spirituality is where, I came around and I started talking to things that I didn't know who I was talking to, but it was my way of kind of putting out my trash and forgiving what happened and saying, I'll never do this again. And thank you for letting me out of this. I didn't even know who I was talking to. Right.
Yeah, sure.
And I don't think that if you don't engage some kind of something you can't see in that moment, you're going to hold that bag for a really, really long time. And especially if you create these sort of like mini spiritualities where you have faith in a government that doesn't act noble, like that invisible thing that didn't remain nameless for a period of time. Right.
Sure. Yeah, no, I think, and that's where in the beginning of this, I think, so those pillars, whether you're talking, even the stuff on top of the pillars is all an illusion. It's all built on the bedrock. And obviously for me as a pastor, that bedrock is Christ for me. And so I build my whole world on that. There's an old hymn that people used to sing, "On Christ the solid rock I stand, all other ground is sinking sand." And it's this idea that there is a being bigger than me that is holding the world in his hands, my world in his hands, and I'm able to trust that, so that even if my principles crack and crumble, even if I lose everything, I fall on this bedrock that's stable and sound, and we can rebuild from nothing. Even if there's an earthquake, you can last through that. And a lot of people, they may look at that and say, "Oh, that's just weakness. You should be able to do whatever." Good luck.
Yeah.
As you go through life, if there's not something bigger than you, the pride of that will eventually be your fall.
Well, if you take the three of us, you take you, me, and Jed. All three of us come on here and we're not telling the most flattering stories about ourselves. We took this at one time being the most embarrassing, character wrenching things that you've ever done. And we put it out there, and guess what happened? It got volleyed back to us and say, "Hey, you know what? You're forgiven." Right. And now go change people's lives using that exact story. Yeah. And it's amazing how that can happen.
So true. Yeah. I thought I would die. I remember Sam and I went to go get our first condo, and my credit score was like 519, and they were like, "Not giving you any money." And I was like, "Well, I'm getting married. I need a place to live." And they're like, "Well, you should have thought about that when you racked up all that credit card debt, didn't pay your student loans and stuff like that." And in the grand, like at the time, I thought like, I don't know what I'm gonna do. And but you look at something like that and the things that I get to do now. I can't tell you how many people have come in and be like, "Pastor, I don't have anything. What do I do?" And I'm able to connect them to the resource. I've been able to bless people. I've been able to do those things because I've been able to navigate and grow in that part of my life. But shame and guilt are two areas that keep people locked up in their mistakes. And I often say to people, guilt is not the problem. Shame is. There's nothing wrong with feeling guilty and saying, "I've done something wrong." Like, we've all done something wrong. Shame makes it an identity and says, "I am wrong," in that. And so I want to move away from shame, and I want to understand, like, hey, I'm going to make mistakes, like, and I can feel bad. "Oh, I made that mistake," but it doesn't affect my identity. I'm going to keep plugging away, and shame really sinks people down and doesn't let them turn around and take what would tried to take them out and use it for fuel for other people. I mean, Jed and his show We Recover, and all that I've seen him do with addicts, and I've watched other people. We have a couple at church, I guess a couple of them that have helped other couples that I thought there's no way that couple is not ending up in divorce. And then these couples take their story and take their 40-year journey or 50-year journey. We actually have a couple at church that has 2 wedding anniversaries. They were married, they got divorced, left each other, lived in different spots. The husband was getting ready to, he was engaged to somebody else. And in the throes of it, without going into crazy details in the story, ends up calling his original wife, and they had a conversation on the phone. He didn't feel right about it, and so he broke off the engagement. They started dating again, and they got remarried a number of years after they had gotten divorced. So they actually have 2 marriage certificates. And so, you know, to have somebody that's going through total crap and feels like their marriage never, to sit across the table from somebody like that that's now been married 40 plus years, and they're able to say, well, you know, actually, you don't know this about us, but we have two wedding anniversaries. Well, why do you have 2 wedding anniversaries? Well, because we took a 5-year hiatus because we were divorced or whatever, you know, time frame was.
But if you talk to basically every person, they all have these stories where they double backed on a principle, right? They were embarrassed for a little while, and then somehow they made it right by somehow recycling that bag of trash, right? They either made it better by, you know, reconciling with the person that they hurt, or they just put it out there in the universe and let it forgive you.
Yeah. I mean, I can't tell you how many of the guys that I work with at the Palms, we had a ton of guys at our group on Wednesday, but so many of those guys, as I hear their stories or I get to spend some time with them individually, they're like, you know, if I can get this right for me, I want to help the next guy. Yep. And I'm like, that principle is so true, and it reciprocates, and it goes down and down and down. You see it in weight loss, right? People who lose weight that can't wait to turn around. I'm going to become a person. How many people have lost all this weight, become personal trainers, and they want to pour that into somebody else. And the same thing goes on the spiritual side of things. I know plenty of people that you know, were far from God, and then they meet God, and it changes everything about them, and they go and become pastors. And so those principles, I think, are kind of true across the board, that when you have a principle that's faltered, or you have a shaky bedrock, and then you find a bedrock to build on, changes everything. Yeah.
And so if, you know, as you're going through these pillars and you're discovering that, and you're just kind of looking at this point for what your version of the story is going to be, because you're going to join the rest of us who've beat down the lack of principle and decided you're not going to do that again. And you build some authentic principle, and there's that transition. You could do it when you're 12 years old. You can do it when you're 50 years old. I always see those examples of the guys that go to college late and they're getting the degree at 55, and you're like, wow, you know, could I do that? And of course you can. I mean, at what point do you decide that you made some ill choices, some bad mistakes, and you can, you know, resurrect that at any point?
Yeah. I mean, Colonel Sanders was like 84 when he came up with Kentucky Fried Chicken. I mean, you can start looking at those examples. And I often have said to people in church, and it's not the most flattering thing, but sometimes when I get going in my sermons, I say things that are good, but I wouldn't say in normal conversation if I was counseling people. But like, at the end of the day, if you're done, and you're, you know, you got nothing left to serve, and you can't do this, and you can't do that, and you can't do this, so just come up here. We'll pray for God to take you home. I mean, like,
check out. Yeah.
You're living as though you're dead. So let's just pray and we'll ask the Lord to take you home right now. Yeah. Because otherwise you got to get in the game. You got to get your hands dirty. You got to do something in that. And there are a lot of people, you know, one of my prayers has been for our church. You know, we have folks in their 60s and 70s, and I say to all of them, like, you're not done yet, right? Like, cause we need you. Like, there's stuff that you can do, skills you have. Sometimes the people in that season think, oh, you know, well, this is a younger person's game. You hear that, I'm sure you hear that in business or whatever. Like, you know, I'm going to get out of this, but like, what could you do to grab a 20-year-old who's just starting out and say, hey, I'll take you to coffee.
Help you out.
Whatever I have is yours. Yeah. What's that worth? To give them identity, the confidence, those sort of things. But those folks do a bad personal assessment of themselves and downplay what they actually have. And they could give so much. Drives me nuts.
This is probably the most helpful show that we've ever done.
I think so.
I'm really proud of this one.
Yeah, I love this show. Well, we love you, and we hope that you got something out of this. We are about done. We won't be back Tuesday. We'll be back next Thursday, and we hope that you're taking the next steps for yourself, living your best life today.
Thank you for listening to this show on Youngstown Studio. If you like our programming, we invite you to subscribe to our YouTube channel, follow our Facebook page, or subscribe to your favorite podcast platform like iTunes or Spotify. This is original Youngstown content, and we would appreciate you sharing the videos and the word about us.